Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Just trying to catch up with myself for a moment here. Body isn't being super cooperative this morning, so so I thought I would at least begin talking in the context of the fact that today is, or maybe not today, but this weekend is Memorial Day weekend. I guess tomorrow is technically Memorial Day. Um, and coming from the generation that was born right after World War II, that was a very significant event in the community that I grew up in, and probably in most communities at post-war. Memorial Day, as you know, remembers the fallen, the men and women who have died in war, as opposed to Veterans Day, which is about everybody who served, regardless of whether they were casualties or not. So we in my town we used to have a parade, and it was very exciting as a kid. Whether I was participating as a Boy Scout or a Little League or whatever, big deal to march in the parade. And then we went to the cemetery, and some minister did a solemn prayer. And then the highlight of the whole day, the honor guard shot their guns in the air. So that was Memorial Day when I was a child. But it really did that remembrance really had a grip on the whole community. There had been so many men and women lost within that decade, um, that it was a deeply meaningful event. And then, of course, subsequent to World War II, we've been in almost perpetual conflicts that have been far more morally ambiguous. I don't think, well, not anybody, virtually no one would argue that force was needed to stop the Nazis and their allies. And even, I guess, Gandhi conceded that point. Gandhi originally thought that Hitler could be stopped with nonviolent, civil disobedient means. And I haven't read this myself, but I've been told that he later recanted that he realized that there was something there that exceeded the ability of nonviolence to contain it or mitigate it. But since then, we've had almost perpetual conflicts, very few years in between the early 50s and now that have been years of peace where young men and women from this country have not been in harm's way in some form. But it also leads me to think about the state of the world today. We got two major conflicts that most of us are focused on to a greater or lesser extent. That in Gaza and the other in Ukraine. But there are actually numerous others that aren't necessarily, excuse me, on the radar in the same way, like in South Sudan and Sudan. Terrible, terrible, terrible conflicts going on. I was reading this morning in South Sudan, there are 7.7 million people who are facing food insecurity. And so on, innumerable deaths and violence and rape and it just awful conditions. And it's almost beyond our ability to even comprehend the scope of these tragedies. Scope of Gaza. There are people right now in Portland, Maine, well, in Maine in general, maybe that the Veterans for Peace are having a fast to support the people of Gaza, and they're fasting a couple of ways. One way is that some of them are eating a 250 calorie a day diet because that's the average amount of calories that a person in Gaza has right now. Some are doing a Ramadan style fast where they can eat before sunrise and after sunset, but nothing during the day, and so on. To me, that it points up two things. One, the absolute horror of these things that are going on. And our impotence to do anything, generally speaking. I have tremendous admiration for the courage and determination and compassion of these people who are fasting in whatever form they're doing it. And yet, if I have to guess, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. And again, I think they probably are aware of that, but feel compelled to do something. So, on one level, I think we need to recognize Memorial Day is not a static thing. It's not a thing that happened in the past. It's not something that happened in World War II or Korea. It's going on right now. Right now, people are dying, many of them Americans, in conflicts around the world. But at this moment, other peoples in other countries are suffering far more, right? It's immeasurable suffering. It's beyond our comprehension. And what do we do? As Zen Buddhists, we signed up to be awake. We signed up to pay attention. We signed up to acknowledge the one body, to acknowledge our connection to all other beings on this planet. And now I'm only speaking of wars, but there are environmental catastrophes going on. And some of the same places like South Sudan are experiencing environmental catastrophes on top of the massive human destruction that they're facing. At least for me, it's hard to wrap my mind around. I can't. when I try. The scale of devastation and destruction that's going on today. I mean, I just read last night more Russian drones attacked Ukraine than any other day, any other night. So rather than going away, that war is escalating. So how do we respond? How do we as Zen Buddhists respond? How do we as human beings respond? How do we as Americans respond? And this made more complicated and more frustrating and more terrifying by the fact that for the most part, we are totally or almost totally powerless. We could join the hunger strike. We could join the people who are blocking roads in places, Portland being one of them, and getting arrested. But will that result in change? Will that save the lives of children in Gaza? And I think there were some people who would argue, well, doing anything is better than doing nothing. And I think perhaps there's some truth to that. They don't know if they can change any outcomes. They don't know if they can make anything better. But they feel compelled to try. They feel compelled to do something, however ineffectual that may seem. Okay, so any of you that want to take back the contract about staying awake, we can do that, you know. But that's the deal. That's what we signed up when we signed up for Zen. That we can't look away, that we can't go into denial. Let's face it, that's where most Americans are most of the time. And Lord knows we've got enough complexity in our own lives, enough distractions in our own lives, enough challenges and problems in our own lives that's you don't have to look very far. It's pretty legitimate. And yet, does that give us a dispensation? Can we say, well, I've got a really complex life, so therefore it's okay for me to ignore genocide in Gaza? And if I decide that I have some responsibility, how do I do that? How do I get involved? Or do I get involved? Looking for a quote here. Excuse me. Well, I thought I had the quotes saved, but all I have is the number of carbohydrates in a half cup of oatmeal. So, but the quote, I will, it's one I wanted to get right. Let me take one more look here because it's such an important quote. In South Sudan. No, can't find it. The quote is the quote, and maybe one of you has it memorized better than I. It's the words that Shakyamuni Buddha said upon his enlightenment. Something to the effect of, I, the great earth, and all beings simultaneously realize the way. So part of what he saw in his enlightenment was that the entire cosmos was altered in some way by it. And I think to a great extent, we Buddhists sort of rely on that to say, okay, well, that's what we've got to do. We can change the universe by realizing our true nature. We don't have to fast if we don't want to, because we're working on this project of realization. And that through our realization, the whole universe is transformed. Well, what does that mean? Shakyamuni Buddha awakened. Are they still children dying in Gaza? Are there still homes being bombed in Ukraine? Are there still starving people in South Sudan? As far as I know. Over the years, I've wrestled a lot with that statement of the Buddhas. What does that mean? we all simultaneously attained the way 2,500 years ago. And yet all this crap is still going on. Horrible things. Are we chasing a shadow? Are we rationalizing to get out of our own discomfort? Does our practice make one iota of difference in these difficult times? Will the fact that we're practicing Zen help to protect democracy here in America? I wrestle with that. I wrestle with that quite a bit, actually, and have over the years. And then I see people talking about Buddhism as a path to peace. And I'm thinking, whose peace? My peace? Is that what's important? How about the peace of the children in Gaza? How about the peace of the people in Ukraine? How about the peace of the people in South Sudan? Is my practice bringing that into reality? Or am I fooling myself? Am I just, is this whole idea of Zen practice another delusion, another way of rationalizing my impotence in the face of all of that horror? I don't have that answer. If you come to me looking for that answer, you're not going to get it. I only have the question. I always only have the dilemma. And then back to the pragmatic question, what can I do? What can I do? I'm in this little cabin in Unity, Maine. Exactly how am I going to have an impact on all of these terrible things that are happening around the world? And I'm just talking about the terrible things happening to human beings and not the terrible things that are happening to the natural world, which are just as bad, just as horrible. What can I do? Well, our teaching says, back to the realization of Shakyamuni Buddha, that all this whole world is one body, that everything in this world is affected by everything else in this world. And physics, with its quantum entanglements and things, is kind of coming to very similar, if not the same, conclusion. So, what does that mean? Is there a sense, is there a way in which what I am doing right here does have an impact, does resonate, does affect other beings? Shakyamuni Buddha certainly thought so. So maybe it comes back to down to a pragmatic question. I apologize. I got this stupid cold. Um, which is that I can only do what I can only do, and I can only influence what I have influence over. And I can therefore, what I can do, what I'm capable of working on is my own heart, my own connection to other beings, my own commitment to loving kindness. Maybe that's all that I can do. And maybe that's enough. I don't know. Lately I've also been thinking of Shakyamuni's enlightenment in the context of morphogenetic fields. And what that says, forgive my, there's a reason I have a degree in philosophy and not quantum physics. So I reduce these things all down to a very rudimentary understanding. But but the way I understand, that makes a lot of it simplifies it in a way that I can understand it is when they talk about chemists creating crystals. The first time that a chemist in a lab somewhere on Earth creates a crystal that's never been done before, it takes X period of time. After that, every lab that replicates that experiment and creates that crystal, it takes less time. And this is a well-documented scientific phenomenon. And that's explained in terms of that a morphogenetic field is created in my language, a pathway. And each time that pathway is replicated, it becomes a little more clear, a little stronger, a little easier. So maybe what Shakyamuni Buddha's enlightenment did was create a pathway, was open a morphogenetic field. So that over time, successive people have been able to follow that path, and it has become easier and easier. We're taking a little less time. I don't know what criteria we would use. So maybe that's the significance of the Buddha's enlightenment. That it's made all of our process of awakening more possible, a little easier. And that throughout that, all of us can say, I, the great earth, and all beings. You know, it's interesting because some of the old texts, this is the old Mahayana sutras, talk about Buddha fields. Now, I don't know exactly what they meant when they were talking about Buddha fields, but I think modern physicists could come to a conclusion about that. We're talking more and more about fields. We're talking about more the genetic fields and other types of fields. So maybe there was a field created, and maybe we can tap into that field, and maybe we can make a difference that way. And maybe our practice really, really matters. You know, Daido Roshi used to talk about the fact that our path of practice required three elements: great faith, great doubt, great determination. Well, what did that mean? Great faith. Faith in what? There's no God in Zen. Faith in our own intrinsic nature is the Buddha nature. That we all have the capacity to realize ourselves. To come face to face with our connection with all of reality. Great doubt. What are we supposed to be doubting? As it was explained to me, the great doubt was the burning questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I here to do? And it's interesting. The longer we practice Zen, the more those questions disappear. Not because they get answered, but the questions just disappear. Kind of interesting. And great determination, that's the most obvious one. We need to carry on in spite of whatever obstacles come into our path, whatever obstacles make our practice more difficult. In all those times when we think maybe it's futile, that maybe our sitting doesn't matter, that maybe our practice doesn't benefit anyone at all. And we still need to continue. If you, I gotta sort of, I know we've come a long circle around from Memorial Day, traditional Memorial Day observance to where I am now. If you want answers, I'm not the right teacher for you. I don't have answers. We're looking for certainty. If we're looking for firmness, we always are looking for that solid ground of certainty. What can we rely on? What is there in this universe that's immutable? There's a couple of koans that relate to this. And I will misquote them for you. The first koan says that the monk goes to the teacher and says, after the great eon, when the cosmos is destroyed, will this continue? The teacher says, no, this too is destroyed. And another monk goes to another teacher and says, after the great eon, after the world is destroyed, will this continue? And the teacher says, yeah, this will continue. Now you've got those two at least appearing to be diametrically opposing responses to the koan. How is that? How can those two realities both be true? Well, first of all, again, if we go quantum physics, they probably can. But even in the Newtonian world, how do you hold that contradiction? And the answer is, I think, that the teachers are responding to the monks asking the question. And in the first instance, the monk that's asking that question, he's been exposed to emptiness. He's looked into the void and he's looking for solid ground. Give me something here. After all this, is there anything? Teacher goes, no. Because did what any good Zen teacher was. He tore it away from him. No, you can't have solid ground. And maybe in the other instance, the teacher saw into the student's heart in a different way. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So, if one of you can say a word of Zen, I will spare the cat. Willie got it. Hey, enough. Come back here.
I think Paco got it too.
Yes.
Well, I am not as wise as Willie or Paco, but when you mentioned the quote, Shakyamuni Buddha, uh, simultaneously was enlightened with all things. Um, and you mentioned coming face to face with our connection. Um, I think it's kind of interesting that since our well, primarily since the last election, um, I think all of us have been looking for ways, what can we do? What can we do? And the thing keeps that I keep seeing repeated, and it seems insignificant or insufficient, but it keeps coming up, and that is something having to do with community. And so I wonder if those who are finding community or proposing that we try to find community, if that isn't um, an attempt to come face to face with our connection to each other. And no one's talking about the Buddha or even quantum physics, but it seems like there's some kind of inherent feeling that community is going to help us. And maybe that has to do with our evolution, where we came from, because we certainly came from small communities. Um, so I think it encourages me to proceed in that direction because it's a connection.
Thank you. You saved the cat.
I think for me, it's about intention, not necessarily um, the expectation of what impact it might have, but simply just doing something, or at least sort of, again, having that drive to help contribute, etc. Um, Not knowing what might trickle down from that action, from that word, from that intention, as it were. I very often think of the story that Kathy said some time ago about the two kids that were at the beach, and the mom came in and was, I'm gonna paraphrase it, Kathy, so forgive me. But basically she was kind of like just being very careless and ripping these hooks off the fish and throwing them back. And Kathy felt moved to say something, and the mother was kind of like, whatever, like, completely dismissed her. And Kathy was mentioning about, how painful that was. And I always think, but you don't know what those kids learned from that experience. Your just your action, your word. And so I think a lot of that, I think of that way a lot sometimes, of just do what is called for, or what you feel you can do, as minute or as major, because you don't know who might hear it, who might see it, who might not even realize, but it's kind of working in the back of their mind, and what repercussions that might come. You just don't know. So just do whatever it is, whatever you feel the moment calls for. Sometimes not doing. And that's all that we can kind of, I don't know. I think that's all that I can do. And so that's how I see it. It might not be something I might ever see in my lifetime or ever, but you just don't know. It could be a good thing. I don't
I'll piggyback on with another Kathy story. It's a short one. Um, I remember, Kathy, you talking about going through a difficult time, and you went to someone and said, I'm I'm just overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. I don't know how I'm going to make it through. And the person said, just do the next thing. And Peter, as I recall, you clarified a little bit that that's part of the uh, recovery, um, not rules, but way path of do the next right thing. So maybe we just do the next right thing as best we see it. I think that's what you're saying, RJ.
Thank you for that. It's an interesting thing because I brought up the example of the cat, the koan with Nanchuan. Why couldn't those students, Nanchuan students, say something that would have saved the life of the cat? And I'm inclined to believe that Nanchuan would have accepted almost anything other than the utter silence that he got. Well, so I'm relating this back to what you just said. It hadn't occurred to me until just now, but I think the next thing is better than the next right thing, because how the F do we know what the next right thing is? And we can be stuck in our heads. It's probably where those monks were. They wanted to say the right thing to Nanchuan. And so they sat there in silence, and the cat suffered the consequences. But, I think what's getting revealed here is one of the underlying truths of our lives that we never know. Even when we think we know, we don't know. Right? There's the story that John Scott likes about, what is it, the farmer whose cow dies, and I can't tell the story, but and everybody goes, oh, it's awful, it's awful, it's awful, and then turns out it's really a boon to, and this whole sequence of these things. But we don't know. We're constantly projecting, we're constantly guessing, we're constantly using our analytical mind, often to discern things that are not subject to rational analysis. You know, the best we can do are sort of probability statements, right? Well, there's a 50% probability that this is going to happen or not. But even that, but that's a guess. Who knows? I look at my little weather thing a lot lately since we've returned to winter in Maine, kind of looking at it even more than usual. So what I've discovered, probably you all know this, but the algorithm is such that if there's a 50% or greater chance of rain, they predict rain. If there's a 49% chance or less of rain, they don't predict rain. That's how that algorithm, at least the one of the ones that I look at, is constructed. Fascinating, you know. How much difference is there between 50% and 49%? But we create, so we do that in that is somebody has created that algorithm for the computer to follow. But that algorithm is modeled on how our brains operate, how we think. Maybe not quite so quantitatively, but we certainly operate like that. So when we think, something certain that's going to happen, well, that means it's, whatever it is, 87% probability. We're always reducing probability statements to statements of fact.
Maybe because it's Memorial Day, but your story of Nanchan and the cat, for me, flashed to LBJ's cabinet and all those brilliant men sitting around with all kinds of statistics and rationale for continuing the Vietnam War. What kind of voice would it have taken to have saved that cat?
When I take all this in, it seems to me that the question to me is linked with karma, which I must say I think about a lot, and I can't say I know any more than anyone else, but it has to do with getting back to, first of all, the bedrock is of the faith, doubt, and determination. The bedrock is the faith, and the faith has to do with the fact that intrinsically we're good. That is going to be the basis, it would seem to me, that Susan's community is based on, and RJ's intentions are based on. That it's the goodness there, and so. Because I suppose there are bad intentions and perhaps bad communities, but as in people, we believe in at least discerning as best we can good intention. Past that we can't go. I would say yes, there would be doubt about outcome, but our belief that in goodness has to do with some kind of moral compass, or it's kind of an anarchy out there. So that's what we base it on. So it seems that the question about the overall effect is what's happening with this group right now, and with you, Peter, and with our intentions, because it is a message, and we do take it in, and we do attempt to live it, and it has to be, it seems to me, linked with action, which I think is certainly one of the purposes. And I think there is a consequence to that. We can never measure it. Is it going to be a universal takeover? Well, set of history is against that. Our thinking's against that. But it is something, and it is at least a light that shines a little further than just us. following our actions into the future. So anyway, thoughts.
You're all going to be silent. I'm going to sit here and cough.
Well, I'm going to stop you from coughing then, Peter. Maybe I'm not, but
Probably not, but
you can cough. You can still cough. I'll give you permission. Wow, a lot to take in here. So I actually believe that, and I, that the way I am in the world does affect the world. um, and I've had that belief for quite a while, and I don't. I mean, I believe that what I keep using that word, and I know, but I haven't lost faith in that. And I think it comes from all my life experiences and really from Zen. Um, uh, I don't. If we could just add a little kindness towards other people and towards living creatures, um, it has to help in some way. I don't know the outcome of all that, but I sometimes think I've been having quite a bit of physical pain, and sometimes I think, this is just all my beliefs. But I sometimes think that there's only so much physical pain in the world, and that if I'm having some, maybe someone else isn't. Maybe it's taking some of that pain. Some of that I even think comes from, my very early life. you know, being raised in a Catholic family and being, you know, somehow getting that out of it, that, um, you know, that taking on somebody else's suffering can relieve them, you know. Uh, so it feels very uncomplicated to me. And, you know, I'm not always, I'm not always great on the determination thing here. I mean, I think I'm pretty good at being in the world and being kind and doing what I can to help who's ever in front of me. Um, but determination, I don't sit every day, and you know, I've always said I need to start sitting every day. Um, so anyway, that's me, or who I think I am anyway. So thanks, everybody.
So, apropos of that idea of not sitting every day, I saw a quote this morning from IQ. Do folks know who EQ was? Um, he was a very radically iconoclastic Japanese priest who found the enjoyment of women and sake to be superior to spending his time in the Zendo. And so the quote that I saw this morning was exactly that. He said, you know, better to sleep with a beautiful woman than sit like a statue on a cushion, you know. So taking that liberally, Kathy, not everything is done by sitting on the cushion. Ikkyu, we don't like Ikkyu over here, but the Japanese love him. The Japanese think he was a wonderful teacher.
And that comes around to Cal's comment that uh, finding the goodness has to be linked to action, which I think you remind us, Peter, just sitting on the cushion is not uh, a goal in and of itself. It's bringing it off the cushion. And that would be the action, I would think.
Yes. Practice is not an end in itself. Sitting practice, zazen, is not an end in itself, which is easy to kind of forget. Zazen is the thing that prepares us to live our lives. You know, and if there's any yardstick, it would be, in my mind, would be not how much we sit, but how much loving kindness and compassion we manifest each day. And in ordinary situations, right? I mean, I find myself working with this all the time. You know, I'm on the checkout line at the store, and I start to grow impatient. I grow annoyed with somebody who's got their thing of coupons that they're pulling out while I'm standing there waiting, making me wait. How ridiculous is that? You know, and so that's for me, that's where a lot of the work is, in simple everyday situations, where no matter how much I've sat on the cushion, it goes away in an instant because I'm annoyed that somebody cut me off in traffic. Or, that's one of my favorites, but there are others. So that's where we're tested. And in recovery in AA, there's a slogan: HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So sometimes we're able to do okay with these things, but if we're hungry, angry, or lonely or tired, not so much. Those can negate our Buddha nature. So that's the test. I'm tired and I'm cranky and I'm on the line at the grocery store and somebody's got 50 coupons that they want to, how do I do then?
I have an experience, even a little more subtle than yours, Peter, but I think it's in the same category. A couple weeks ago, there was um, a notice that went out that up at the Unitarian Church, there was a gathering, community gathering, to see how we can help our immigrant neighbors. And I thought, oh, this is good. I can go to the community gathering and learn more about how to help those who need it. And about half hour into it, or maybe an hour into it, the speaker said, okay, now we're going to um, have you introduce yourselves to your people who are around you, in front of you or beside you or whatever. And the first thought that went through my head was, oh shit, if I knew I was going to have to do this, I wouldn't have come. And I guess that's the introvert in me. But of course, I did have to because I was there. And I spoke to two people who could be my friends. Uh, they were so wonderful to talk with and shared similar values, and yet they were very different. And uh, so it's my own hesitation to reach out rather than stay. And here I was, aiming for community, but I'm still in my little place, don't talk, don't, stranger, please don't talk to me. So
I think that's a wonderful story because that's it. It's those moments of hesitancy. It's those moments that we recoil back from being open and compassionate, right? And the first step to addressing that is noticing it. Because I think we probably all do that to a greater extent, depending, maybe different situations, different kinds of challenges. But we react automatically. And the first step to changing that automatic reaction is becoming aware that it's there. And that we are reacting inappropriately in some way, or uncompassionately, or selfishly, or however we want to frame it at that moment. That's the whole basis of cognitive psychology, right? You gotta know, you gotta know, you gotta see the pattern, you gotta see it, because then we can be efficacious in changing it. Sometimes it may take years for the patterns that are deeply entrenched in our minds. I recognize that in myself, talking about my childhood, which is prehistory. But that said, I constantly see patterns that were ingrained in me as a child that don't serve me at all today, but they're there. And I still pick them up. I still have those thoughts. I still repeat. if I'm not really very cognizant, paying attention, being awake. Being kind, being compassionate, being loving, being part of community is work. And it takes self-awareness constantly.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Everybody enjoy the rest of this weekend. Don't hurt your back shoveling the snow, and it will be spring someday.